Okay, it's recording now.
And this is?
That's the microphone. Okay. So now you need to get back a little bit.
Okay.
Are you're going to be?
I'm going to introduce everybody.
Oh gosh.
I thought I'd bring this Craig's hopeful.
Hello.
This is a new camera as well, so I'm.
Where am I?
You are basically, I'm going to talk about the genesis of the plan. I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
Very
I'm going to basically introduce everybody, and it's really exciting. I've never done this before. I'm going to introduce a biochemist, which I've never done before. And I know she's a biochemist because she has the formula for ending domestic violence and child abuse. So that's exciting. And I'm referring to Melanie Blow, who's one of my colleagues at the Stop Abuse campaign. And when she wants to make sure that she doesn't get paid, she works as an advocate and working as an expert in child abuse and lobbying and doing everything she can to protect children, because from personal experience, she knows what it's like for children to be abused. And then we have Greg White, who I have known for many years. Greg runs a Batterer program that is part of the New York model in Buffalo, New York for Catholic Charities. And for those of you who don't know, I've been an instructor in the New York model Batterer program for many years. So I've worked with Greg and greatly admire the work that he does. And it happened that you're going to hear about what we're doing in Buffalo to implement the Quincy solution. And so when we were working in Buffalo, to have Greg there and to have his knowledge of the local area and his enthusiasm has been wonderful. And earlier today, those of you who saw the first presentation know Andrew Willis. He's the founder and the leader of the Stop Abuse campaign, and we work regularly together. The one other thing I wanted to mention in terms of this, just as a trigger warning, in Buffalo there were a series of child murders. That's going to be the start of what Melanie's going to talk about, and so I want you to be aware of that. And at the same time, it doesn't end there. That's the beginning of the work to make sure that that doesn't happen anymore. So there's a much better ending than beginning. And with that, I think it's time to introduce a biochemist.
I think that is the warmest introduction I have ever been given. First of all, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, we're going to start this by talking about the genesis of the Putting Children First program. Stop Abuse campaign is implementing in Erie County. And on November 30th, 2010, Bianca Cartagena was murdered by her mother. On April 17th, 2012, Abi Fada Muhammad was murdered by his mother's boyfriend. On August 7th, 2012, Roderick Geiger III was murdered. They haven't figured out which parent to charge yet. On November 10th, 2012, Michael Clifford was murdered. Have not figured out which parent to charge yet. On March 15th, 2013, Gage Seneca was murdered by his mother's boyfriend. On March 19th, 2013, Austin Smith was murdered by his mother's boyfriend. On September 17th, 2013, Ian Brooks was murdered by his mother's boyfriend. On January 8th, 2014, Mayona Smith was murdered. They have not figured out which parent to charge yet. On May 14th, 2014, Jacob Noe was murdered by his mother. And on December 14th, 2014, Chandler Zuck was murdered by his mother's boyfriend. These are 10 children who were murdered within a 48-month span in a county of about 900,000 people. It's off the charts. Erie County is a county close to me geographically and emotionally, and towards the end of this, I was working for Stop Abuse campaign, and we just started having some discussions. We've got to do something. We have got to change the paradigm of what normally happens after a child is murdered, because more children die as a direct, literal consequence of child abuse than die from childhood cancer every year. I'm not even bringing the ACE study, which you all learned about earlier, into count, because if you take that into consideration, a whole lot more children die from child abuse than childhood cancer. But children are murdered as a result of abuse with some regularity, and there's always a big to-do about it, and there's always a media storm, and people always decide, you've got to fix CPS, you've got to fix CPS, and that is the first place people always go. One of the things we, Stop Abuse campaign, was absolutely convinced of when we started doing this was we were not going to focus on fixing CPS. We were not going to ignore them, but we were not going to focus on that, because the problem with fixing CPS is that CPS only comes into effect once a child has been abused. That's much too late. So the nice thing is we know a whole lot about how we can prevent child abuse from starting. We know about, and it was very interesting for me because I have before I was working for Stop Abuse campaign, I had more of a background in the early childhood development part of this, which is, we'll touch on that in a minute. Things like maternal home visiting, which works a lot. Since I've been working with Barry, I've been learning a lot about the Quincy solution. So I realized that with that and some other pieces, we actually know how to put together the most comprehensive child abuse prevention plan that any community has ever tried. And we are in the process of doing this in Erie County, New York. This is a very slow go because it changes a lot of, people have to change the way they think about it. It costs money, and there are local politics and turf wars and things like that that are unpleasant and complicated and slow and miserable. But we are making progress. We have had several meetings with the county. The county has indicated support and willing to put down some money. We've been trying to get money from the state. That New York has a governor who is not really fond of funding children's issues. There, I said it. And we're circling back, and we're already going to start campaigning for this for next year, as well as working with private sectors, private businesses, private foundations. But so let's talk a little bit about what that is. You guys got an introduction to the Quincy solution earlier. This is a very significant policy that involves coordinated community response, best practices for enforcing DV, basically a zero tolerance policy. And the way we're going to be doing it in the county is judicial trainings also, so that the family court does not become the domestic violence battleground that it is. Whether or not the Safe Child Act passes this year, which it's almost not going to, there's almost no chance of that happening, but there's a very good chance of it being introduced. We are going to try to start securing the money to do some of these trainings. And it's not a huge sum. The difficulty, if the trainings are not mandatory, is going to be making people take them. But we can, one of the nice things about Erie County is they do have a very progressive history. They had one of the first family justice centers in New York, and people are trying to implement bits and pieces of this. Fatality assessments are one of the tools used in implementing the Quincy solution. They're working on that. very easy access to orders of protection is one of the tools for Quincy. They're working on that. So this hasn't been a terribly complicated thing to get people on board with. It's a lot of turf wars and stuff like that, but we're working on it. That's one part of what we are trying to do. The second part is to grow maternal home visiting programs in the county so that they're serving 100% of eligible high-risk parents. Does anyone know, how many of you know what maternal home visiting programs are? Okay, I'm impressed. Okay. They're one of the best tools we have to prevent child abuse, and they are offered to about 6% of eligible parents, and that's a problem. One of the really interesting things about maternal home visiting, and I've kind of cut my teeth on programs, on advocacy to support these things, is that they don't work if the mother is in an abusive relationship. So before, when there was an outcry to grow the programs, we'd always, advocates, every time there's a fatality, hey, this is a way we could have prevented this, this is a way we could have prevented this. If you look at the data set we've got in Erie County, though, a lot of these kids are killed by their mother's boyfriend. So that's not so strong of an argument. And that's why introducing an anti-DV program along with a maternal home visiting program is really, really powerful and really, really significant. The politics for the maternal home visiting programs are very simple. Nobody's opposed to this. They're just expensive because you have to do it right. And the way